Yeah, we're live, and of course, Usama just disappeared. He pulled the Egyptian disappearing trick, Eh, but he'll be with us in just a second, I'm sure, once he turns visible again. And we're joined by Paul, and we have JC, and I don't really know what we're talking about, so I think I'm going to leave that to JC to fill us in. And welcome, guys. We can all say hello in a moment. So,
Hello.
JC, please tell us a little bit more.
Hi everyone, and hi everyone in the chat. So over the last couple of weeks, Lloyd was on a business trip, so we were exploring the Quran and seeing what references are there that have been exegeted as Muhammad, but when we read in context, they're talking about Jesus. So with that in mind, today we're going to have a look at, did Muhammad exist? So we're going to define who the Muhammad of history was, because there is certainly at least one Muhammad, probably more, and who is the one in the narrative, and why the one in the narrative is a complete invention, and so on. So, we don't try to upset anybody.
But the Quran was written by Allah. Allah said Muhammad is real. Therefore, Muhammad was real.
Yep.
And Mama Aisha said Muhammad was real. I believe her, and everything she said is true.
Huh. But the thing with the Quran is, if you read it, even without reading, without taking into account the Muhammad occurrences, it still describes a preacher preaching.
Yeah,
So must be
I mean,
Muhammad.
I don't think any of us state that there was never a person, but we do state that there was at least one, probably several people so the Muhammad we have today is a composite of one or more, possibly two or three figures throughout history, and they've basically taken certain characteristics, including that of Jesus and others, and placed it on him. So they made him a political, religious, and social leader, and so on.
Exactly.
You know, it's amazing. Yeah, if we want a little bit comparison between our Lord and our Savior Jesus and Muhammad, when you read the Bible, you learn about everything about Jesus before Jesus came in the flesh. I go 1,000 years or so, and then you go through the writings of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and the Book of Acts, and the writings of the letters, and you see Jesus everywhere. I mean, he is the main portion of the Old Testament, one book at a time, and the New Testament. It's all about Jesus. If Muhammad is the final prophet and a final messenger, why we don't see even 1% of that which is written about Jesus in the writing of the Quran or in the teaching of Muhammad in the Hadith? But I mean, it seemed to me like we know nothing about the man. Do we?
We know nothing about him. I mean, his supposed birth house in Mecca was destroyed by the Meccans, by the Saudis. Why would you destroy such archaeology unless it was actually inconvenient to your narrative?
Yeah.
That's what I think also.
Yeah, go ahead, Brother Paul.
Hi, Paul.
Yeah, sorry. Were you addressing me?
Yeah, welcome. Hello. And
Hello.
Yeah, any thoughts from you on this particular thorny issue?
Well, wait and see what Jay-Z has to say. Is always a good policy. But of the five references to Muhammad or Ahmed in the Quran, they don't really tell us a huge amount, and four, maybe at least three, are almost certainly later interpolations. A fourth one is very likely an interpolation. So it doesn't really help us very much at all. I don't think the text of the Quran. What's more interesting is the other sources, the sources from the basically the Jewish and the Christian traditions. They're slightly more interesting, but the actual Quran doesn't tell us very much about the name Muhammad.
Right. Yeah. So JC, shall we just proceed, and then you can just fill us all in?
Yeah. If you guys don't mind, we always talk about the four places where Allah mentioned Muhammad in the Quran. I think it's very important to read them, so we know exactly what Allah said to us about Muhammad in the Quran, and we can look at the word Ahmad as well. I think it would be better let the Quran speak for itself to see how the Quran is empty of telling us anything about that Muhammad. The first mention of Muhammad, it's Quran chapter 3 and verse 144. And I don't know. Does anybody have a Quran to open, or should I read it myself? If you don't mind, guys.
Do you want me to bring up the Quran, your one?
Yeah, I can bring mine up. And it's just what is bothering me, or it literally make me think, what in the world these people are talking about when you come to the Quran? Because when we talk about Muhammad in the Quran, I think he is the final prophet, he's the final messenger of Allah. We must know something about him. But here is what is written. I'm going to open my Quran here.
I have it here.
You have it?
Yeah, which one would you like?
Okay, let's go to Quran chapter 3 and verse 144. And listen to what Allah said about Muhammad in the Quran. It seemed to me like somebody else is speaking. It's not Allah nor Muhammad. Go ahead.
And Muhammad is not but a messenger. Indeed, the messengers passed before him. If he dies or is killed, will you turn on your heels? And who turns on his heels will not harm Allah anything, and Allah will reward the thankful.
Can you imagine that? If he dies or killed, what
That
a
doesn't
wonderful
matter.
term. It's just stupid. If he died or killed,
I believe there's a passage in the Quran where it even says, it doesn't matter if you listen to me or not, because it's not going to change anything anyway. You know, I can't remember the verse, but it actually says this, and it's so bizarre, because then why would you listen to the man if it doesn't change anything?
so you know what's amazing? This is the statement I studied in college, in high school in Egypt, in the story of Abu Bakr Siddiq. And that is the statement which Abu Bakr Siddiq said when Muhammad was wounded in one of the battle he was involved in. And Abu Bakr Siddiq said it word for word what we read here in the Quran. So now we have to think, is it the statement of Abu Bakr Siddiq, or is this the statement of a revelation of Allah? Okay, that's the first one. Let's go to Quran chapter 33 and verse 40. Quran 33 and verse 40. Another very important verse to learn about Muhammad in the Quran. What did Allah say there?
Allah and his angels pray for the believers.
No. Chapter
Oh, one
33.
just prior, sorry, yeah. So Muhammad was not the father of any man among you, but he's the messenger of Allah and the khatam of the prophets.
Yeah, Khatam. Yeah, Khatam, the seal of the prophets. Now, why did Allah give that verse? If you look for Asbab al-Nuzul, Asbab al-Nuzul, the first one, Muhammad was wounded. Asbab al-Nuzul for this one, Muhammad want to have sex with his sister, with his daughter-in-law. Shame on you, Muhammad, to have sex with Zainab. Oh, Allah said, I'm not the father of any man among you. I'm just a prophet. I'm the seal of the prophet. Oh, what a great way to learn about Muhammad from the Quran. Go to Quran chapter 47, verse 2, brother. 47, 2.
(47:2) And those who believed and did good deeds and believed in what has been sent down on Muhammad, and it is the truth from their Lord, he atoned for them their evils, and he reformed their condition. But I thought no Muslim can take on the sins of any other. Muhammad didn't bring atonement. Well, am I reading that wrong?
And it's amazing when the Quran said no bearer of sin will bear the sin of others. It's a logical, it's a biblical. If I am a sinful man, I cannot carry your sin, Lloyd. I cannot carry JC's sin or anybody's sin. I'm only responsible. But Muhammad, for sure, was a sinful man, so he could not do it. But
So
somehow,
how did he atone for others' sins?
and he will.
Yeah, that's a bit of a heavy clue. I think we need to actually talk about the Muhammad verses at one point and do a whole show. I think we have different ideas over those. But yeah, this is pointing at something. But I think it's better if we just discuss those 4 verses one day, and maybe we throw in the Ahmad as well. But what we're doing, we're not going to actually go through those verses. In fact, we're actually going to talk about the narrative, because when this debate between Jay Smith and Raymond Ibrahim happened last year, one of the things that happened as a result was some people saying, "Oh, those people who say that Mohammed didn't exist, they are conspiracy theorists." It's like, well, no. That I found it quite upsetting, because it's a big part of my research. Mohammed did not exist, period. Those who are saying that is a conspiracy, the conspiracy is the creation of Islam. And now we should start asking, why are people still failing to see that the Mohammed of the narrative is a complete invention? So hopefully today we show that there was a Mohammed of history, certainly, probably many of them, but that has nothing to do with the guy from Islam. So that's the goal for today.
If you don't mind, brother, let's get the fourth one, and then we get Ahmed as well. 4829.
Yeah, I don't want to delay too much, Usama, because I'd like JC to get into his discussion, if you don't mind.
All right.
Just one thing, JC. You say he's a complete invention. Well, I think it's not completely accurate.
I'll qualify when we get there.
Yeah, he shares some characteristics, very few, with some of the historical Muhammads. For example, he is a preacher, and I believe the historical Muhammads were preachers. He was a warlord. He was active in Arabia, but we don't know very much. We don't know. I don't think we know something else about the historical Muhammad.
Yeah, I will, when we get to those sources, we're going to see some today. I will qualify those statements. So the one thing that I want to make people really see is that the things that happen in history, and then the story that is the narrative, those things are actually not connected. It's a different person. Of course, they copied from different people. They had inspirations from different characters, but they are not the one and only. And we're going to show the sources that are misinterpreted, basically, to give credence to Mohammed when it's just very unfair to do so.
Okay. Let's see your material.
Yeah, should we actually get started?
Yeah, you're on screen.
Cool. So let's start actually with the example that everybody would understand, because we need to define what it means for Mohammed to exist. And that is the Mohammed of the narrative. So let's go with Jesus. So Jesus is the Word that took on flesh. He died on the cross. He resurrected on the third day, performed miracles, and was born from a virgin. So these are just some of the things quite important to the arc of Jesus. Now, if you were to travel back in time, you get a time travel machine, you go back in time, and you meet the apostles after these events. You ask about Jesus, and they say, "Oh no, he's a rabbi, but he's just a guy. He died, stayed buried." It's like, okay, that means Jesus didn't exist, because he needs to fulfill these criteria. Otherwise, if the historical Jesus was just a very nice guy that died and stayed buried, then you are praying to a fantasy. You might as well pray to Gandalf the Grey. In order for him to be the one that is described in the Bible and the traditions, is that he needs to be this, not just a man, but he needs to do these sort of things. So that's how we're going to do with Muhammad as well. He needs to fulfill certain criteria. So if the historical Jesus was just a man, and then all of those things are invented late, you are basically just worshiping something that doesn't exist and it never did. So, for example, perform miracles. And this is something that is going to be very important in a moment. So they invented lots and lots of miracles for Jesus. For example, speaking from the cradle, as a baby, creating clay, mud animals, and then breathing life into them, and so on. So, of course, you would expect that people would create fan fiction out of this character that people are talking about. But the church was very good. They were trying to tell a piece of history. They were not trying to create a mythical character. They were saying, this is what happened. So imagine if you are one of the church elders in the 4th century and somebody brings you the pseudo gospel, one of these, the infancy gospel, you would read and says, and Jesus was born from the Virgin Mary. And you would say, "Ooh, that's good. Maybe this is a lost gospel. Let's keep reading." But the moment that it says, and Jesus spoke from the cradle, you would go, okay, this didn't happen. Because we know from the Bible, from the Gospels, from the writings of the church fathers, and from every tradition, that the first miracle was after the baptism at the age of 30, turning water into wine. Therefore, as good as it sounds amazing speaking from the cradle, you don't add it on. So the church was very good at saying, no, this is history and the fan fiction is fan fiction, right? So that's very, very important. Imagine that the church would have done like we're going to see that Muslims did. And when they encountered this infancy gospel, they add it to the Bible and says, yes, it happens because it makes Jesus sound good. Well, it says in that gospel that young Jesus unalived a kid because he destroyed one of the clay birds, and then he was told off, and then he resurrected the kid. So the church would have had to go through a whole area of gymnastics to say, okay, you see, when in the prophecies it said that the Messiah would walk on earth and would not break a branch, and here he unalived a kid, but you see, he resurrected him, so it's all good. They would have to do all of these sort of things because it would be a problem. Now, that's what we see with Islam. In Islam, we have the beginning of Surah 48 says, Allah forgave Muhammad's past sins and future sins. But they're telling to every Muslim that Muhammad was sinless. So when that is pointed to them, it's like Allah forgave his previous and future sins, he was a sinner. They would say, no, 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 no. Because the way it works is, if Allah removes your sins, then you are sinless. And it's like that's not how it works. If God forgives your sins, you are a sinner whose sins are forgiven. You are not sinless. It's a different category, but they have to twist it in that manner because otherwise they have a theological problem.
Yeah, another very important fact. Sometimes they play the game of the word here is zamb, and the word khati'ah is different than the word zamb. Therefore, when Allah forgave his sin, it's not like big sin, it's like a small sin, because the word is zamb, not the word khati'ah, which is sin, which is obviously hogwash for those who do not know Arabic. It's the same word. Zamb is sin, sin is zamb. As a matter of fact, the first time we read the word zamb in the Bible, that is when Canaan killed his brother. It was zamb. It's like killing is not a small sin in any shape or way. From even in Islamic understanding, killing is a big sin. Go ahead, bro.
And we see at least the parallel that when it came to the church, they tried to keep the history and the myths removed. When it comes to Islam, it's the other way around, because Islam is really the antithesis of Christianity. They added everything and anything that people were creating. So we have to define who Muhammad of Islam is. There is a wonderful picture. First is that the night journey of Muhammad. Muslims will say that Muhammad went from Mecca all the way to the heavens, through Jerusalem, all of those things. That is their claim. Now, Christian apologists, for example, will claim that Muhammad didn't do that, but that he claims so that he was there and he lied. So one group will say
he tied his little horse or donkey or whatever it was up at the mosque.
It's a mule, brother.
At the mosque in Jerusalem. What mosques were in Jerusalem at that point in history?
Yep.
The mosques that disappeared since 70, or the mosque which it will be built a little bit later, 30 some years
this
later.
is the same mosque that is buried next to the Injil and the original Bible that the Muslims don't have anymore.
Yeah.
But so this Muhammad needs to either A, have done it, if you're a Muslim, or have claimed it, but he didn't do it, he was lying, and therefore a false prophet. But this needs to be about him, and probably Odin already knows where this is going. Also, this guy needs to have claimed that he was given a final revelation that was basically the last revelation, independent to everything before. If that story is created late, it's like saying that the resurrection of Jesus was invented late. It would just remove the character entirely. Muhammad needed to have said this. Also, because we read it in the Quran, this guy would have walked around saying to the Jews, I'm in your previous scriptures, I'm prophesied, and so on. If he didn't do that, Muhammad of the narrative did not exist. That would have been like inventing miracles of Jesus or calling him the word of God. If that happens late, then the whole story is fiction. Also, that he instructed people to follow him. Of course, Muslims will say, no, Allah said that Muhammad is the perfect example for everybody. But Christian apologists will say, no, he was lying. He was just saying, basically, follow me and look at me, I'm so cool, right? But it needs to come from him. And that he was the final messenger, just like Usama showed earlier, the seal of the prophets, he came after Jesus, and that was it. So this is how the Muhammad of the narrative would be fulfilled. We could add a lot more. We're not going to put miracles because the miracles are added much, much later, which everybody knows that as well. These are the basics. So
Yeah.
but let's actually now that we have defined to a degree the Muhammad of the Standard Islamic Narrative, let's look at the sources. So Eusebius' history, this is one of the early sources that everybody is familiar with because it's very early, it's independent, and describes Muhammad to a T. So let's see what it says about the man. It says, in that period, a certain one of them, a man of the sons of Ishmael, named Muhammad, a merchant, became prominent. A sermon about the way of truth, supposedly at God's command, was revealed to them, and Muhammad taught them to recognize the God of Abraham, especially since he was informed and knowledgeable about Mosaic history. Also, Muhammad legislated that they were not to eat carrion, not to drink wine, not to speak falsehoods, not to commit adultery, which we would have a lot to say about it. But when we are told that, and that's the first time that someone showed me this source, that's all I was shown. And it describes the Muhammad of the narrative to a T, because it has the name, being a merchant, being an Ishmaelite, he claims to speak for God, or basically God is giving him the instructions. He's familiar with the Mosaic law, which a lot of it is in the Quran, obviously with a twist, but there is a lot of law in there. And then the legislations. So in theory, this is describing the Muhammad of the narrative. However, when we read the source in full, we are told a very different story. Let's see what actually happened according to this source that we use for Muhammad. It says this: 12 peoples representing all the tribes of the Jews assembled at the city of Edessa. Then Heraclius went and ordered them that they should go and stay in their own place. So they, the Jews, departed, taking the road through the desert to touch Castan, to the sons of Ishmael. The Jews called the Arabs to their aid and familiarized them with the relationship they had through the books of the Old Testament. Although the Arabs were convinced of their close relationship, they were unable to get a consensus from their multitude, for they were divided from each other by religion. So this source that it is quoted to prove that Mohammed existed is giving us a very different backstory. It's saying that the whole thing begins with the Jews. Basically, the Jews had been mistreated by the Byzantines, allied with the Persians, were betrayed by the Persians, and then they went to the Arabs. They didn't have a good beginning of 7th century, let's put it that way. And they are the ones who go to the Arabs for aid. They are the ones who are going to give them a narrative that is going to be used by this man called Muhammad to galvanize the masses. He's going to say, hey, the Holy Land was promised to basically the descendants of Abraham, so let's just join forces and take it from the Byzantines and the Persians because they were always fighting. So the origin story in here is very different. In the Standard Islamic Narrative, Muhammad claims to have been received a revelation, which of course apologists will say, no, that was Waraka, Hiya, Sergius, or somebody else. But he's not friends with the Jews. He actually is telling to the Jews, oh, believe in me, believe in me. And the Jews don't believe in him. But what this source is saying, it has nothing to do with a revelation, is the Jews going to the Arabs and saying, help us go and reconquer the Holy Land, which they did. And of course, the Jews got betrayed 5 minutes later, so it didn't work out too well for anybody. This does not go well with the Standard Islamic Narrative, not to mention about the location. Then it says a little bit more about Muhammad, saying things and about Abraham. We will move on from that. People can read it if they want to. He has more information. And then this is what happens as well in this source. Then all of them assembled together, 12 tribes. The sons of Israel were in their own tribes, 1,000 to a tribe, to lead them to the country of Israel. So now we have the Jews basically leading the Arabs into the Holy Land. And then all the remnants of the sons of Israel then assembled and united, becoming a large force. They dispatched a message to the Byzantine emperor saying, God gave that country as the inherited property of Abraham and of his sons after him. We are the sons of Abraham. It is too much that you hold our country. Live in peace, and we shall demand from you what you have seized plus interest. The emperor said, nah, this is not the standard Islamic narrative. Are we at least on agreement on that? It's a bit different.
Yeah,
It's not. I'm not sure that it is. Yeah, I mean, if you're JC, if you're saying, let's suppose that somebody thought that this account by Sebios is more or less correct. You can disagree with some issues, whether there were 12 tribes and so on. But suppose that one were to accept this as a legitimate historical record, that there was a guy wandering around calling himself Mahmad or Muhammad, and that he was leading an alliance of both Jews who believe themselves to be or are descended from from Jacob, and a group of Arabs who regarded themselves as descended from Ishmael. Are you saying that it would not be accurate to regard this person as the Muhammad of history?
Well, what I would say is, and the next source, by the way, is going to be the Doctrina Jacobi, is that people cannot have it like both ways. If this source confirms that the real Muhammad of history had certain features, it's like that's fine, but then we have a problem with the narrative, and we need to find out which one is correct. What has happened to me in the past, particularly in the beginning, is I would be shown the sections that mention Muhammad, the ones that I selected in blue, but the rest was not told to me. And when I actually asked the question about it, I got, oh, no, the other things must be wrong. So it's a way of pushing the narrative into this source. It's like, no, you can take it or you can leave it. And seeing as it describes the Muhammad of the narrative quite well, particularly Muhammad, I think it has at least a certain level of value, and it has to be explored, of course.
See, in many ways, it contradicts parts of the narrative anyway, with the role of the Jews, doesn't it? Because in the narrative, Muhammad has to have several conflicts with the Jewish tribes of Yathrib, because there are passages in the Quran that talk about taking over the homes of the children of Israel and casting them down from their fortresses, and somebody had to explain this in a polytheistic background, and so you needed a subplot. Oh yeah, by the way, there were some Jews there, but it doesn't really make sense, the story that is told, because you've got the Constitution of Medina, as a so-called, and this lists a whole load of Arab tribes that have Jewish components, Jewish members of them, and it doesn't mention any of the Jewish tribes in the traditional narrative. So were they not part of the Constitution of Medina, and so on? That bit doesn't make sense. But the Constitution of Medina does, I think, broadly support what is being told by Sebios here. I think the idea that it seems to show that the fighters from the Jewish fighters who'd been expelled from Edessa were then embedded, as it were, within an Ishmaelite military unit, and that's where you get this division into the different clans. So I would say that the Sebios, to my mind, looks fairly reliable. I don't think anything he says is strongly unreliable. But the question is whether, if what he says is correct, would you call that person Muhammad? And I would tend to think that he is, and it's just that the traditional narrative is wrong about him.
Yes, exactly, which is exactly what we're discussing here, which is there is a real guy, and then, of course, when they create the narrative, they take from that guy and from many, many others. We're going to see some fun sources in a little bit, but the one that they send prayers to 5 times a day is not this guy. The guy that they pray to could have been inspired, could have some things from this guy, including the name, including being a merchant, and so on, but for the most part, they fabricated that as a Frankenstein monster. So as well, I'm going to use this to extend a massive olive branch to everybody, because you see this sentence here about him legislating things that is found pretty much in the Quran. So I cannot say the Quran had nothing to do with this guy. After all, the Quran, they will say, is a hadith. It's actually sayings. So I do think that the Quran probably contains parts of history and then a lot of fluff. And normally we tend to think on only one person can be right. So for example, if Paul is right, then Odon has to be wrong, and so on. In this case, after everything that I've studied, I don't think it's the case. I think this is a soup. And about this guy that we see here in Sebios, some of his things could very well be in the Quran, but there wouldn't be 6,000 verses about it. There would be a selection that we need to find them. With Odon's thesis of Judean-Nazarenes, there is a preacher here saying things to convert Jews to accept Jesus as the Messiah. The same. It could be even this Mohammed, that is a Judean-Nazarene, but it could be one of the tribes that goes with him, and then they take teachings from him. So there could be many different things. And that's only about the Quran, because if we go to the traditions, then is where all of the material from Lloyd actually kicks in. There are too many connections with Yemen, with Persia, with all of the other lands. So it does look like they did take stuff from all of the places and then they try to harmonize them. So it is possible that everyone is right, and some people will be right 10% and other people 5%, other people 20%, but everyone is directionally correct in their own thesis. They're not seeing ghosts. They're actually seeing something that is there and that is part of the picture. So I think that's important to say.
Although I do see ghosts.
What do you mean?
Good.
Just kidding. No, JC was saying they're not seeing ghosts. They're seeing something that's really there. And then I just said, I also see ghosts. No, I don't want to see any ghosts. I have in the past, I think, and it was unpleasant. So let's move on.
Just before, I've got 2 points here.
Yeah.
The blue part of the text, JC, you said it sort of goes along with the Islamic narrative, but there's something very wrong. It's the Muhammad name. It has to be pinpointed. He is not named Muhammad in Sebeos history, but Mahmet. It's not the same name. And I heard, I think it's Mel on his channel explaining that you cannot make Muhammad out of Mahmet. Muhammad, you have 3 syllables. Mahmet, you have only 2. So should Sebeos, or the author of the Sebeos Chronicle, because most probably it's not from Sebeos himself, and most probably it's also not from 661 or something like this, but it's a much later text. So we have something here that is very strange, is that the leader, for the preacher, is not named Muhammad, but Mahmet. So this is one remark. And I have another one, is that if you look in the Islamic narrative, you also find Jewish influential figures around Muhammad, the Muhammad of Islam. I'm thinking of Waraka bin Naufal. Waraka bin Naufal, he is the cousin of Muhammad's first wife, Khadija, and he is said to be a Jew who converted to Christianity, actually Nazarenism. But he was a Jew. He was a Jew who could also read Hebrew and Arabic and translate the sacred scriptures of the Jews and the Christians into Arabic. And there are other figures. One could hypothesis that can put forth the hypothesis that Khadija herself was Jew or Jewish or half Jewish because she was the cousin of a Jew. It could be possible. And there are other characters. I'm thinking about Kahab al-Ahbar, who took part in the conquest of Jerusalem. So I don't know whether he's supposed to have met Muhammad in the Islamic narrative, but still he's a Jew who converted to Islam, so still a Jew. And he's said to have built an oratory or synagogue on the Temple Mount. And also he was a companion of Umar ibn al-Khattab. And the thing, there is this thing, this very strange thing in the Islamic narrative. Umar ibn al-Khattab had the nickname or the nom de guerre Al-Farouk. Al-Farouk meaning the one who separates. It's a title that is given to Jesus in Aramaic Christianity. Jesus is the one who separates right from wrong, good from evil. So it means the savior. And Muhammad is also said in the Islamic narrative to have borne the title Al-Farouk. So they could be one and the same, Muhammad and Umar. You see, there might have been historical Muhammad bearing the title Al-Farouk, conquering Jerusalem, rebuilding the temple there with the help of Kahab al-Ahbar, for example, and having been taught by Jews to do this. Jews like Waraka bin Naufal. So you see, if you cross-examine the Chronicle of Sebeos with the Islamic narrative, it's like a sort of sift. You are sifting the narrative, and you are taking only the things that that match with Sebeos. And you do the same with the Sebeos, with Sebeos and the narrative, and you get nuggets of truth, of historical truth, that still has to be discussed, of course. But if you do it with every other source, like I think we will do tonight, we might get a sort of picture of the historical Muhammad or Muhammads.
Yeah, we're going to talk about Umar in a bit with some fun sources. I really hope that some of the things we're going to show that you haven't seen before, I have only just come across them. They're fun. But for now, let's actually then move on to the next one. And very good points, Odon. And I think that everything's about Umar. He's the one that conquers the city. The songs of praise would have been about him. Here is just another page. If anyone wants to actually read the whole thing, it's worth a read. So anyway, Sebeos history, you can find the PDF very easily online. So the other one that is used quite a bit is the Doctrina Jacobi, and as it always happens, they will say, well, it was done for political reasons. People just pick and choose what sources to use, but they use this one to prove Mohammed. It is written by a Jew, and it says this: when the candidatus, so that's the ruler, from the Byzantines, was killed by the Saracens, we Jews were overjoyed. The Byzantines were the bad guys. And they were saying that the prophet had appeared coming with the Saracens and that he was proclaiming the advent of the anointed one, the Christ who was to come. Now, that is not Jesus. Because in the very next page, so this Jew is saying, and I fear that the first Christ to come, whom the Christians worship, was the one sent by God. So we have here two different beliefs. This is saying these guys, the Saracens and the prophet that comes with the Saracens, wants to bring forth the Messiah, but that is the Jewish Messiah, which means they need to rebuild the temple, start the sacrifices, and that Messiah will come and then prove that Jesus was not the Messiah. And in this source, he's saying, because he says that this guy comes with a sword and he's bad, that, maybe we got it wrong. And even though we are waiting for the Messiah, and this guy is saying that he's going to bring the Messiah forth, maybe we got it wrong and the Messiah already came. And the guy that is coming now is the Antichrist. So, in other words, according to this source, the Jews and Arabs are still friends. They are still on their way to Jerusalem to basically rebuild the temple, get the sacrifices going, and bring forth the Messiah, who is not Jesus. Would you agree with that claim, gentlemen?
I don't quite understand, JC, why there's an inconsistency here, because the Quran says that Jesus is the Messiah. I think it says it about 10 times or so. So the Quran is quite clear that Jesus is the Messiah, which of course is the word Christ in a different language. But it also says that Jesus is going to come again. It says he's going to return as a portent of the hour, and he's going to judge people on the last day. So what Doctrina Jacobi says about this person, if it turned out to be Mohammed, is consistent with what the Quran says, isn't it?
Yeah, that's actually exactly my point, that I actually don't think that they are compatible. I think
No, so they are compatible, aren't they?
Yeah. Let me try and explain. I think, and I'm happy to be corrected, that that at this point, and based on what we have seen before, at that point they are still thinking Jews and Arabs. They are not thinking Christianity. They are not thinking Jesus. Hence why this guy is saying the Messiah is going to come. He's not thinking Jesus. But by the time that the Quran is put together, now Jesus is inserted. That the belief of the people who were doing this march is not the same belief that we see in the Quran, because the Quran talks about Jesus as the Messiah. And to me, this reads like they are not believing in Jesus as the Messiah. They want to bring the Jewish Messiah.
I still don't quite see why in this passage, and they were saying that the prophet coming with the Saracens is proclaiming the advent of the anointed one, the Christ who is to come, who I think is a little later on in your excerpt is made clear this is the Christ whom the Christians worship. I don't see why that is inconsistent with what the Quran says. It says, or for that matter, what Christians believe. It is that Jesus came, he was the Messiah, and he will come again. Surely this is common to Christians, this gentleman, and Muslims. Do we not all three of us believe this?
Yeah, but so the argument, and then let's see actually if what Odon thinks and everybody else, is that this guy is writing as he is a Jew. So, and from this, he's saying that maybe the Christ was Jesus. So when he's writing this, he's thinking, oh, these guys are actually coming to bring forth his Messiah, the Jewish Messiah. And in the previous source, we have seen that it is Jews and Arabs, Ishmaelites and Israelites working together to go against the Byzantines. If it was anything to do with Jesus himself, I would have hoped that the sources would have said something like, those guys over there, the Byzantines, they are not really the followers of Jesus, we are, or something like that. But instead of that, it feels like there is this group of those who call themselves the children of Abraham joining forces to bring forth that belief, and they haven't basically done the steps of calling Jesus the Messiah. That would be my reading of this, but would like to know as well what Odon thinks about this.
The first thing when you try to analyze the Doctrina Jacobi is that you have to understand it's not a source written by a Jew. It was written by Christians from the Byzantine Empire. It's a pamphlet that was written by them, addressed to Jews in order to convert them to Christianity. So with this in mind, it's a bit different. So imagine the authors as Christians. They have information about what's going on with Jews and Arabs around the 630s. They know that among the Saracens, someone could be recognized as a prophet by the Jews. So the information is here is that particular prophet could be a Jew himself, in order to be recognized as a prophet by the Jews, but he could also be an Arab. And the thing is that the Jews, they are waiting for the prophet that will announce the imminent coming of the Messiah. Not the coming of the Messiah in the future, but the imminent coming of the Messiah. This is what they are waiting for. And here we see the contradiction with the Islamic narrative, because in the Islamic narrative, Muhammad announced the coming of Jesus at the end of times in a very distant future, whereas here we see him announcing the imminent coming of the Messiah. So you see the difference here, and this is very interesting, a very interesting source, but it's not easy to use, since it has not been written by Jews but by Christians with a polemics approach.
But Odin, couldn't one say that the Quran does talk about the imminence of the last day and the eschaton? There are many verses where it says nearer and nearer and nearer and nearer and so on. It talks about it'll come when you least expect it, in the twinkling of an eye and so on. So isn't that I mean, I would say that the eschatological fervor wanes a little bit. So by the time he's actually leading an army, he's not quite as, the end is nigh, as he was in the 10 years beforehand.
Yeah,
but I don't think he ever resiles from it. He never says it couldn't be.
There is this very strong apocalyptic emphasis early on, and then he does say that no one who hears these words today will be alive in 100 years. And then he has to switch tactics.
Yeah, I hate to give Muhammad more credit than what he is. Lloyd is absolutely right. But if you think about eschatology, end time, something to do with Islam, Muhammad did not know jack about his time, not even the next week or the next month. He did not know what's happening that day. So I know that I see, and I've been watching lately, some Muslims writing book about end time, and guess what? They're using the Christian theology to make up their own eschatology. But there's nothing in the Quran, nothing in Muhammad teaching about end time, except he made the greatest error, which I love. He said, I will give you more information. He said actually this, here's what Muhammad said. Every prophet came, he warned his people about the Antichrist. But I will give you more than anybody else. And he explained it very clearly that the Antichrist will be with one eye. And then he made the boo-boo, which is, but Allah has two eyes. So that is the great evidence that Muhammad was really confessing that Christ is God. Because we're not talking about the coming back of Christ, he's talking about the Antichrist to be with one eye, but he assured us that Allah has both eyes. So here is what Muhammad said. But besides that statement, Muhammad never mentioned anything about end time or end time prophecy. He didn't give prophecy for his days, as for heaven's sake, as I just said.
Yeah, with the narrative of Muhammad and with the things that he said, of course, they are the hadiths and they are much later. I think we should talk about it because I'm pretty convinced that they wrote quite a few things to make him look like the Antichrist. I think the people who were there writing a lot of these stories, they tried very hard to make him look, he breaks oaths, he does horrible stuff. It's almost like they wanted us to know that this was not a person to be followed. But that's a different conversation. We should talk about that some other time. But anyway, so with there are lots of other sources. I really like these two, but I wanted to bring them up
before we leave Doctrina Jacobi, whoever wrote it was wrong about one thing. He says the prophets do not come armed with a sword, and of course one prophet, a very important prophet, did come armed with a sword, and that was Moses. It's Moses who is who Muhammad, or the author of the Quran, compares himself most closely to. He's the one who gets all the mentions in the Quran. Was it 100, 120, isn't it, or 140 references in the Quran? And the Muhammad, so the author figure of the Quran, seems to present himself as a new Moses, a Moses who's going to replace the the children of Israel in the Holy Land with all the descendants of Abraham. So in fact, I think this phrase about becoming armed with swords and chariots seems quite again, it's quite consistent with the Quran, I think.
Paul, I think you're missing the Christian perspective of the Doctrina Jacobi. It's because the author is Christian that he puts forth that prophets do not come armed with a sword, because Christians are supposedly non-violent. And you see, this document, it's all about converting Jews to Christianity by making, you see, it takes advantage of the apocalyptic context of the time, where a prophet is announcing the coming of a Messiah, the imminent coming of a Messiah. It takes advantage of this to point, to make, to forcefully make the Jews believe that the Messiah is not someone who is to come now. He was Jesus, actually. And besides, there is another point I would like to make. You talked about the Quran being insisting on the end times, and you're absolutely right. The Quran has so many verses announcing the apocalypse and the end of times and so on. And what's very, very odd is that we see that the Quran is a sort of biblical apocryphon. It's really written with a biblical context in mind, and such a scripture, such a quasi-biblical scripture, with this emphasis on apocalypse, it should present the main character of the apocalypse, which is the Messiah, Jesus, and it doesn't. There is only one tiny verse that could link Jesus to the apocalypse. He is said to be a sign for the end of times. So it's very, very strange that this Quran, who talks so much about the end of times, doesn't talk about the main character, the main figure of the end of times. And it's even stranger than we find sources like the Doctrina Jacobi talking about the coming of the Messiah. And we have also hadith in which Muhammad announced the imminent coming of Jesus. This is, you see, it's as if the Quran had been edited, as if the Jesus of the apocalypse had been edited out of the Quran.
That's possible.
Yeah. Well, let's actually at one point we should do a session where we just go through these sources, because there aren't actually like that many. Most of them, they're just a couple of paragraphs. So, but let's actually.
Just a point to make here. I mean, because some of this is a little bit over my head. This is not exactly my area again. I mean, obviously some things, but it's only recently that entertaining this kind of discussion or these perspectives has become acceptable. It wasn't long ago that you'd be laughed out of the room for thinking like this. But now people are starting to seriously entertain this. And I would only say that the momentum is growing, even in academia. There's more evidence coming forward. There's more historical research being uncovered. And, archaeology is starting to prove a certain point. So I think, Odin, what you say is that's a fair statement to make, fair conclusion to reach. I mean, the narrative is falling apart. Now, I can't claim to have definitive answers, and maybe none of us can. But again, I think all of us have reasonable, well-grounded, well-considered arguments that do stand up, that do fit the facts. And I think we all are converging within our various areas. We also are converging on a story. So the truth might be somewhere in the middle, but I think none of us are exactly egregiously wrong. Previously, this would be considered egregiously wrong. Now it's, this is starting to make some sense.
I think the world owes a great debt to Stephen Shoemaker and his book Death of a Prophet, which completely opened this up. Robert Hoyland had written Islam as Others See It quite a long time earlier. Was it sort of 20 years earlier or something? It was quite a long time earlier, I think. But all the information was there, but nobody had actually put it together. It was, as far as I'm aware, it was Stephen Shoemaker who really did this, what we are doing now, for the first time, and put all these passages together and says, look, put all the pieces together, what does this show you? And we've got one or two more sources since then. But yes, I think it's now, the argument is so compelling. It should be mainstream.
Very true. So let's see. So my main argument for saying that the Muhammad that we saw, or this is described in these sources, and the one that the Muslims pray to 5 times a day, is basically because of the stuff that we've been discussing. Let's say that this is representative of the full Quran. And in the previous episodes, and actually we've done here as well on the channel for a long time, we have seen verses that tell a different story. I always like to start with Surah 17, verse 1, because this one was an eye-opener for me. So when we then look at the Quran, we said, or I said earlier, that Muhammad needs to have done the night journey, or he needs to have claimed to have done the night journey. But now when we zero in on that verse, we see that it has nothing to do with Muhammad. The surah has been traditionally called Bani Israel, and then it begins with this thing, with a servant who is not named, and then it continues, and we gave Moses the scripture. So the previous verse is about Moses, and we can see how they invented that about Muhammad. They had to make him do this. They created a great corpus of stories about the night journey in full color, full details, speaking to the prophets, speaking to Allah, being given the 5 prayers, all of that. That has absolutely nothing to do with anything other than fiction in order to make this guy a prophet, or basically to create the prophet. So this one, for anyone who is not aware of, I actually got this first from the Christian Prince. He explained it to a caller a long time ago. So if anyone wants to challenge this point, I would be grateful if they go to the Christian Prince and ask him and say, hey, is Surah 17 verse 1 about Muhammad? And then he will give a full explanation, how it links to other verses in the Quran, the whole thing. From there, I read that in Odon's book, and then I saw David Wood actually saying the same thing. Surah 17 verse 1 is not about Muhammad. It was understood to be about Moses. And think about it. David Wood is one that still thinks that Muhammad existed, because there are so many stories written about him that if they are all false, then there is a huge conspiracy. But he's also said that this verse has nothing to do with Muhammad, it's Moses. Therefore, he must have realized that they have created a great corpus of stories to make this about Muhammad. So we can see Muhammad being invented. And that's a video where I have those sources plus others, including Imam Tawhidi and quite a few things. So if anybody still thinks Surah 17 verse 1 is about Muhammad, you can watch that, and hopefully your doubts will disappear. Surah 17 verse 1, night journey, it was invented as part of the narrative. So now we have one. Yeah.
Sorry, Christian Prince has been saying things like this for a long time. I mean, he's mainstream, but he's not exactly affiliated with anyone. He tends to be on his own. He doesn't really connect with academics. But many people have told me that the things that I have, conclusions I've reached, and the evidence I present is very much in line with Christian Prince. So it seems that very often he and I hit upon the same discoveries and come to the same conclusions. But I mean, maybe it might be worth including him in one of these discussions, if at all possible, if some academics would reach out to him, because he seems to have uncovered a lot of obscure things that people seem to take seriously.
Yeah, and this thing about Surah 17, verse 1, I think I heard him during that show saying that he noticed this when he was like in high school or at uni. So when he was like very young, he just looked at this and said, this has nothing to do with Mohammed. So he realized, yes, like that. So I think he's incredibly advanced, but because what he does is normally apologetics, he will just go with as in he will discuss the narrative and he will go through the hadiths. But I think he has probably figured out a ridiculous amount of stuff. But there you go. If someone doesn't believe it, they can go and challenge the Christian Prince. Mayday, Mayday. The other one that I really like, the second one I always play is this one. So Surah 97 is a hymn about the birth of Jesus. So we did Christmas special last year. If anybody wants the full information about the hymns from Ephraim, the Syriac, and lots of other stuff, that's the video that you should watch. In short, this is nothing more than a hymn about the birth of Jesus. This is the rendering from Christoph Luxemburg, and it reads, we sent him down during the night of destiny. What do you know the night of destiny is? The night of destiny is more beneficial than 1,000 vigils. The angels and the spirit send down with the permission of their Lord all sorts of hymns. Peace there is until the break of day. Now, this is what Christoph Luxemburg does by going to the Syriac and doing all of that very deep analysis. But the thing is, even if you don't do that, even if you just read the Arabic as it is written, it is still incredibly obvious that it is a hymn about the birth of Jesus. The first three verses, they don't say anything. They just say something happens at night. Then angels and spirit coming down, and then peace it is until the emergence of dawn. Of course, it's about the birth of Jesus. First, for anyone who thinks, the Arabic says we sent it down. The pronoun in Arabic is the same for it or him. It really depends on how you read it. So it is the same thing. And and this actually shows how the narrative was constructed, because at one point, probably during the Abbasids, they have this thing already stuck in their book, and it is about the birth of Jesus. Not only that, it's saying that he's sent down. And for anyone who says this is not theologically correct, it just has to sound nice. It's a hymn. It doesn't have to be for you to take the theology from this. It's just it sounded nice. So we see that they have to make this about the Quran because something is being sent down and you are pushing Islam. So that thing which you send it down automatically has to be the Quran.
What
But
if,
it is
what
sent
if,
down in
what if
one.
the thing that he sent down, the Quran, is Jesus? What if they've taken a
Yeah.
symbolic idea and made it into this physical book and said, no, this is what was sent down, this piece of trash we wrote, right? But what if it's actually Jesus that was what he sent down? So Muhammad and Jesus are actually kind of the same thing.
Yeah, the night, and I'd like to add something quickly here. The night of faith go against almost everything we learned from Allah in the Quran and the teacher Muhammad. The night of faith is one of the, according to the scholars of Islam, it's a night in one of the night of the month of Ramadan. Scholars disagree which night it is, and that's why it is good as a good Muslim believer, if you don't believe which one, is to fast all night long, so to eat all night long, and you be in prayer, because you never know if it is a night of faith. That is when the angels will hear the prayer of the man and they will answer it. No matter what it is, you're going to change your faith. You're going to change your future. That goes against everything else in the Quran. If it's Allah who ordained for you and you have no choice but to say, accept whatever the word of Allah is, as it is in the hadith from day 120. When the baby inside the mother womb, according to Quran chapter 22, as Allah created you from nutfa and so on until make it a new creature, that the angel of the womb will write on your book, on your page, exactly what is your future, what is your what's going to happen in your life. So how can a man change what is already written by Allah and the angel of the womb in one night in every year in the month of Ramadan? It does not make any sense. If you take it, the physical understanding, the physical interpretation to the night of faith, and Allah sent it down the Quran on the night of faith, nothing about that fit the rest of the will of Allah to lead astray whom He will and to guide whom He will, or to prescribe for us the entire future of our life, not only here when we die, but literally for eternity. Where we're going to spend hell or heaven, that is all ordained by Allah. That does not fit with the doctrine of the teaching of that passage in Quran chapter 97, verses 1 and 2, whatever you want to, and how far down you want to go in it.
I think Daniel Beck takes the view that what is being sent down here isn't the baby Jesus. What's being sent down is, which actually doesn't really make a lot of sense. As you said, I think it doesn't make a lot of sense to send down the baby Jesus. What happens is that Mary conceives miraculously through the Holy Spirit. But that's not the same thing as sending a baby down. But what is actually sent down is the command, the Amr, which is the end of the world, the rule to begin, or the command to bring about the end of the world. But one other possibility that occurred to me is it could be the adult Jesus that is being sent down. It is Jesus who lived, died, and was resurrected, which I think the Quran says implicitly, and then going to come again on the last day to judge the living and the dead. This might be what is being spoken of in Surah 97. I see no reason why, even if Jesus is the thing that's being sent down, it has to be baby Jesus. Why couldn't it be resurrected Jesus, the Pantocrator?
Yeah, also Gabriel Soma has a different interpretation for this, also about Jesus, but nothing to do with his birth. For me, as I said, I don't try to get into, but what did they really mean with the theology? So was Jesus the word already inside of Mary or not, or sent down at the moment when she gives birth? It's like, don't care, because the theology, I mean, I'm not trying to take my theology from the Quran, that's rule number one. It simply sounds nice. If the first 3 verses is saying that something had come down on a very special night, and it is with series until the emergence of dawn, it's like it's nativity. It's what they really meant is obviously open for discussion. But by the way, the Quran also says peace is on the day when Jesus was born, but also John the Baptist. So a little bit weird.
But when we talk about other places in the Quran, when Allah sent down the Quran, as in case of Quran 2:185 or Surah Al-Dukhan verses 1 to 3, it is clear. He said, we sent down the book, or we sent down the Quran. So I don't know why here he did not mention what it is, and the scholars want to take, the scholars of Islam want to take it. It is the Quran. No, if it is the Quran, why he did not say, surely we sent the Quran down in the night of fate? That'll be fine.
I think Osama, it's talking about sending down the Kitab, doesn't it? But the Kitab isn't necessarily a written book. It could just be the word of God. So, and Jesus is the word. So, and the Quran says that Jesus is the word of God. So,
yeah, and I will add to that the majority of those verses, it actually says exactly like here, we sent it or we sent him down, then that is exegeted as the book, the Quran, but that's not in the verse. So, and actually, those are the things that we had been discussing. But anyway, this one I think is very clear. And on that show that we did there as well with Odon, sorry, Odon, your face doesn't show. I had the timestamp right there. But we even went through how this thing went from they had to make this. They have to now create a story about the Quran being sent down in one night when everybody was being told that the Quran was revealed over 23 years. So they have to create all of this story about the Quran going from upper heavens to lower heavens, a whole different fiction. So just because they cannot tell you what it is. And like Usama said, the hadiths about the night of Al-Qadr are complete comedy, because they tell you that you have to seek the night of Al-Qadr, but they're telling you nobody knows what the night of Al-Qadr is or when it is. It's absolute comedy gold. But
and even if it's true, how can you change the will of Allah, which is ordained on you before the foundation? I mean, is this a joke? I can change Allah's word because I'm going to pray on that night?
Yeah, and that's the night when you are being heard. But anyway, so in here, look at the things that we've discussed over the last couple of weeks. We're not going to go into a lot of detail, but one of the things that we did is we looked at Surah 355, where it says very clearly, those who follow Jesus will be superior until the day of judgment. So then we took that to other places, because if it says to follow someone, that has to be Jesus by default because of Surah 355, and to see who it sounded like. So we found in Surah 556 a very similar message, that you have to follow the messenger that will make you successful. That already unlocks that the messenger, in many of the verses at least, they never meant Muhammad, and it meant Jesus. We went to Surah 757, the same. It begins with follow the messenger, and then at the end, those will be the successful. And actually, Paul, you mentioned about the word Ummi, which is the difficult one. That's why it's the only problem with that verse is the word Ummi. And Gabriel Reynolds did a video, I think 2 days ago, just explaining that being one of the two words most discussed in Islamic circles, because there is a problem with the word. So I recommend you watch it, and you will see it's pretty much what we
No, that's
discussed.
one that would seem to pass me by. What did he say? What did Gabriel say on that?
Well, I'll do my best. That they disagree, because they say that Ummi is supposed to be unlettered, but then when it appears in plural, Ummiyin is talking about people who are
Brother.
just they don't know the scriptures, but they can
Yeah.
read and write. Basically,
No.
they are the Gentiles.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Exactly.
yeah.
I put it in my translation of the Quran, Gentiles, and I go with it all the way to the Supreme Court to fight it. It is the Gentiles, because you cannot tell me that Allah sent Muhammad, the illiterate, to all the Arab who were illiterate, when we know from the same history we learned from the Muslims that they used to write poetry, and they used to pick up the best 7 poetry and hang it inside the Kaaba as an honorable position for those who wrote this poetry. Unless you believe all the Arab were illiterate, they could not read and write, then you can believe that Muhammad was illiterate. I don't believe in any way, shape, or form that Muhammad was illiterate, but he can read and write. There's no way a man in the high family, high position, as we hear about Muhammad, so we know that he was an orphan, blah, 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 but he worked for Khadija, running business for 15 years. You can, for heaven's sake, 15 years in Egypt, if you're working around the pyramids, if you're a kid who never been to school, and you work around the pyramids for 15 years, you'll be speaking at least 8-10 languages of the foreigners who come to Egypt to visit the pyramids. And they speak it very well. And don't tell me that's not education. So Muhammad was the Gentile prophet, as the Apostle Paul was also known to be the Gentile prophet. And Paul had more education than any of the disciples of Jesus. So move on.
Right. So we saw that just by linking to the command of following Jesus, which actually then means that every time that you will have a command like this, either A, they are talking about Jesus, or B, is it one of the apostles? They are actually allowed to actually be quoting one of the apostles, for example, and saying follow Jesus, or it is a preacher who is saying that's what they have to follow. But the whole thing about no, these guys didn't follow Jesus. Sorry, the Christians are not following Jesus. And then you go to the tafsirs, and they will explain how following Jesus really means follow Muhammad. And it's like, come on, guys, the Quran is actually more clear than we give them credit for. So other verses we saw, Surah 758, again, the same theme. Following the messenger means that it will be the successful. No Muhammad by name, oddly enough. We saw Surah 24, 51 to 52, which the being successful and being calling for Allah and the messenger is attached to the sentence so that he may judge. Again, another very clear call. And one of my favorites is in Surah 58, 22, because it's telling you to obey Allah and the messenger. And then at the end, it will say those are the successful. But right in the middle of the whole verse, it says that those who followed them were given a spirit. They were given the ruh. So that's interesting because that is a Christian context.
Yeah.
So when we take those things into account, all of the things that are on screen now is that the Quran was telling a different story. Like initially, there will still be sections that are probably about the original Muhammad, probably Umar. I think the verses that are violent and doing these weird things, they have to be one of the warlords, or it has to be later interpolated by Al-Hajjaj or something. But the bulk of the book, or a lot of the book, it didn't command about obeying Muhammad, following Muhammad, nothing of the sort. The focus of the book was Jesus before they started changing things. And I think we could see that, or at least accept it, when we see that there are verses like Surah 17, verse 1, and Surah 97, that they are telling a different story. It is in the narrative that they make things about Muhammad and about the Quran.
Yeah.
Once we see this, we can understand other things. For example, Surah 9:31. How is it that that verse says that Jesus is Lord? That is not okay in Islam. Because of that, we could then go to other verses like Surah 2:40 and 48. And when we read that in context a couple of weeks ago, we saw that they are not a person saying to the Jews that Muhammad was promised, but rather that the messenger promised was Jesus. And we're going to see more of that in a minute. Also, I'm going to just put some verses on the screen. Surah 287 to 92 is not talking about the Quran, it's talking about the gospel. Surah 376 to 86, again, is not talking about Muhammad being promised. It's talking actually about the Messiah. But because it says messenger, they have pointed at that and says, you see, that's our guy. It's not. You read it in context, it is what it is. The same with Surah 4, 46 to 52. They are meant to be talking about Muhammad, but they are not. They're talking about Jesus. Surah 5, 46 to 59, the same, is about Jesus and the gospel, not about Muhammad and the Quran. Surah 46, verses 7 to 13, it's preaching the gospel, not the Quran. Surah 61, verses 5 to 10 is talking about Jesus, not Muhammad. Then a couple of weird verses like Surah 23, 111, it talks about people being rewarded for following the messenger, which once all of this is understood, it seems to be talking about the apostles and the first followers of the way. The same with Surah 304. Then we have another fun verse. Surah 48, verse 9, commands people to exalt the messenger. And when you look at the tafsir, how they try to hide it, it is pure comedy because they have to break all of the Arabic rules of grammar in order for that verse to not say that you have to exalt the messenger. But the messenger is Jesus, as we see in all of this. Another thing we saw, Surah 45, verses 16 to 18. The Sharia is not the ordained way, was Jesus, not the Sharia of Muhammad. And then, because of that, we could see this. There are 3 places in the Quran where the Quran says that a spirit is given to the believers, which is interesting. But then when you go to Corpus Quran, they write, instead of translating that as the ruh, spirit, they do revelation. In those verses, as if by magic, when the believers are given a spirit, now that's too Christian. So now it just means inspiration. Sorry. So we can understand why they are playing with the language. We see other features. Surah 54, verse 1 is about the moon split. But we know that this tradition about the moon Muhammad splitting the moon did not appear until much later. There is no accounts of Muslims speaking with Christians and saying, I know I can believe my guy because my guy actually split the moon. That is the first card they would play to say how powerful he is. But there is no accounts of that until much later. And then you have hadiths and you have all of this stuff. Remember what I said before about the Christians? When they got fan fiction about Jesus, they said, no, this is not the Bible. This is just fan fiction. In Islam, it was the opposite. As they created the stories and fan fiction about this Muhammad, they went farther and farther away from the Muhammad of history, and they kept giving him miracles and also as stories that they could point at the Quran and say, here is our guy. But as we explore more and more, we see that's not the case. Then, after seeing all of that, things start to make a little bit more of sense. So when the Quran says that following the messenger, that you must follow the messenger because he's the perfect example for you, it's not Muhammad, it's not Momo the Chalmo. It's actually Jesus because we can see him referred to as the messenger, except that they try to hide it. Once we see that, we can understand why the Quran actually confirms that Jesus died in Surah 355 and 517.
I mean, I've had discussions with Muslims about what is the spirit of Allah. I mean, in various, depending on the source you read, it's the angel gibberish. Other times it's Muhammad himself. But there's no real discussion of the spirit as in the concept we have in Christianity of the Holy Spirit. And they also have no idea what the Messiah is. They use the word, but they have no idea of its connection to the Hebrew Bible and all of the prophecies, the implications, the meanings, the authority that are bound up with that word. So they just use words in a very empty, very hollow manner as well. I mean, in this case, it just tries to negate anything that is Christian, but it seems to do so in a very pointed manner. But it would also lead one to think that originally the book was very Christian-ish, if you will. And then afterwards, they had to somehow try to reverse some of what it said to try and make it say the exact opposite. I mean, there seems to be, as I've mentioned before, there seems to be a tug of war in the book. On the one hand, it's saying A, but on the other hand, it's trying to say not A as well.
Very true. And the Holy Spirit became Gabriel, I think not earlier than the 9th century, perhaps even later. So they were struggling with the whole concept of why is this spirit appearing here? But that's when you invent religion, these things happen. So, but we can see all of these things that are actually very Christian. And one we're not going to discuss, we discussed before, which is, for example, the word Shekinah, or rather Sakinat in the Arabic. We delved into it in the past, and we saw there is more to that story. It's supposed to be the dwelling place of God, according to the word in Hebrew, but in here, it keeps being sent down, like in Surah 48:4, Shekinah sent down into the hearts of believers to increase in belief. So to me, it looks like they thought that the Shekinah was the spirit as opposed to the dwelling place of God, but that's open for discussion. But because of these things that we see now in the Quran, we know that there are problems, and we can zero in on some of those things. Now, just to be fair, so in all of these things here, say that I got some of these things wrong, and if we look into a particular verse and we look at the context, I will stand corrected because it was not talking about Jesus. Fair enough, but not in all of this. Most of these, we have also seen them in the previous shows. The Quran was packed with Jesus as the messenger, and that is what it was used later to create the stories of Muhammad. It had to match those verses, and we're going to see that how it happened in real time, really. So
I wish we had time to look at all these verses and do it a little bit of a deep studies than just looking at then talk about it. I just give one quick example. In Quran 355, the one you mentioned earlier, it is amazing that following the messenger, following Jesus, and the amazing thing about that verse is that it's not you're going to be okay until another prophet come later, but until the day of resurrection. So, and وَجَعَلَ الَّذِينَ تَبَعُوكَ فَوْقَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا إِلَى يَوْمِ الْقِيَامَةِ, and I will make those who follow you, Jesus, above those who disbelieve in you until the day of the resurrection. That will end the assumption or the claim of any prophet will come after him, and whoever is going to follow any other prophet come after Jesus will have any followers to be above Jesus's followers. I mean, that verse alone will end the comedy or the claims that Muhammad is a prophet who came after
But
Jesus.
not only that, the Quran explicitly, or Allah, I mean, Allah wrote the Quran, right? Basically.
Yeah.
Allah tells us explicitly that prophecy is of the Jews.
Yeah.
That prophecy comes from the Jews. And Muhammad is very happy to tell us he's not a Jew. So therefore, he can't have the gift of prophecy.
Sure. Yeah, he have to be one of the children of Jacob or Israel, according to the two clear verses of the Quran, which we can talk about them later. But even if Muhammad was a Jew, imagine Muhammad was a Jew, but nobody can come after those who follow Jesus, because that victory and that exaltation Allah gave to those who will follow Jesus in Quran 355, it is forever until Christ, until the end of life. So how can that verse can be understood wrong when it's clearly talk about Jesus and the followers of Jesus, and you tell me, oh, and then Muhammad came, and oh, the followers of Muhammad will be, and it does not work that way. It does not work. Oh, you have to destroy the whole Quran in a garbage can if you want to keep playing games like that verse says the opposite of that verse and that verse contradicts that verse. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, but much of it is like we've discussed about Surah 17, verse 1. They will because they will exegete one verse about Muhammad, it breaks the whole flow, and then you don't know what you are reading. It's like, why is Muhammad in here? But the things that we have here on the screen, this is a small selection of everything going on. And much of the Quran is, well, it's talking about Moses, so it's talking about Moses, or it's talking about Abraham. So those things would not actually feature in here. It's the verses that they have exegeted as being about Muhammad. And when we actually look at that in context, we see they were not talking about Muhammad at all. And we could talk about how they went from A to B at one point.
Yeah.
But for now, let's see how I think they did this switcheroo. So first is these were the apostles. So the apostles, according to the Christian narrative, they were trustworthy. They were real people. They made mistakes, but they went to their bloody deaths, never changing their story, saying the most magical story ever. They were trustworthy. They didn't do it for money, for women, for power, anything of the sort. We go to Islam. Not only 3 of them were actually assassinated, lots of the Sahaba were actually killed in battle. All of these people were doing things for money, women, power, and so on and so forth. These are the people that you would not trust them with anything. Yet all of the hadiths, which of course you cannot trust, the whole narrative is supposed to go all the way through them. The
I think
people you
even
would not
with
take anything
Ali,
from.
Uthman, Umar, and Abu Bakr, I think you may find alternative stories as to how they died. So I'm not sure if these are definitive. There may be other sources that have different narratives on their deaths. I mean, because there was excessive amount of assassinations and plots and warfare against each other, which the apostles never did.
Yeah.
What's really incredible about the traditional narrative is that Muhammad has supposedly had gathered these people around him. By the end of his life, if you believe the story, he had complete control over the Arabian Peninsula. People were coming from Egypt. The king of Egypt was sending him tribute. He was sending people off to destroy temples left, right, and center. He could do pretty much whatever he wanted, and he'd gathered around himself this group of select people, handpicked, and none of them could stand each other. And on the day Muhammad died, I think Ali was the only one who buried him. The others didn't even turn up to his funeral. They were all going off somewhere and deciding who would be the caliph,
successor
behind the first caliph, behind Ali's back. So Ali's there burying Muhammad. Nobody else turns up, and then they have that rather ugly scene at Fatima's house where the Prophet's last grandson is killed in the womb, and it's it's ridiculous to think that this is some sort of pious holy tale of somebody. He could have picked people who got on with each other. He could have picked people who were peaceful and virtuous and wanted to do the right thing. How on earth can you believe that there's this person would gather everyone around him who just fought like rats in a sack, even while his body was still warm? It's incredible.
Yeah. And to be fair, that's actually probably quite close to what happened. As we have seen in the previous sources, these people were basically warlords that went to conquer land. All that they care about would have been money, women, power, and so on. So if the original guys, whoever was actually real, that most of them, they actually had these ends, would actually make sense. But it actually comes from their narrative, like for the most part. But we just know instinctively that even according to their narrative, anything that comes from them cannot be trusted. These people are not trustworthy. Yet when you see people pointing at their hadiths and saying, well, you see, here we have Umar describing Muhammad, and he's like, are you kidding me? Okay, so that's a big problem. Their sources, they would go through people that you would never trust. But when it comes to Islam, they're phenomenal. They're the best generation of Muslims. Absolutely not. Now, fun sources. So I saw this the other day and I thought, let's bring it up. So in this source, it says here, left this one here in case anyone wants to actually read it. The story of Muhammad getting this news from Bahira, from the hermit, about him being this prophesied prophet. And the source continues. Surprisingly, a similar story relates the annunciation made to Umar as the future conqueror of Al-Shams by another learned hermit on the basis of the same scriptures. So then the story says how Umar is, I think it's in Damascus or something like this. And then he finds himself hiding outside of a convent. So a man, that hermit, came out of the convent and proclaimed that the people of the book recognized with certainty that no living person knew the scripture better than he did, because reasons. Whereupon he announced that he was able to identify Umar according to his description in the scriptures as the man who would drive the convent dwellers out of their abode and conquer the town. So here we have a source basically with Umar being prophesied in a not too dissimilar manner as Bahira. But it gets more interesting because that's one source that tells a story. Then there is another story. And in the longer version, the author here writes, this longer version adds valuable information about Umar. And what it adds is the annunciation of the coming prophethood of Muhammad. So we have one long, short source making it all about Umar. And then we have a longer source that is talking about Umar being prophesied and stuff. And also it tags along Muhammad being the prophet. And he ends this with, I suggest that the shorter version is the earlier one, and the longer aim to convert, so to speak, the missing link, i.e., creating a story about putting Mohammed into this previous story of Umar. And then he says about other allusions to stories. For example, when Umar is conquering Jerusalem, that the Christians, before they surrender, they say, no, we will only surrender to Umar. And the reason, because they said, indeed, this is the one whose description we found and who will conquer our land. And then there are more stories just like that. So basically, Umar was prophesied, and these people were not making stuff up.
I don't know. I mean, I can share some stuff like that about Ali.
Yeah.
And that's why the Shia see Ali Wali Allah. Ali is a friend of Allah in their Shahada, in their call of prayer. And obviously, they don't do that in America or in the West. But the day is going to come, it's going to be like Iran, or it's going to be like in some place in Yemen or in Lebanon where Muslims, they have Ali, Wali Allah. And I remember when I was a child, I'm not kidding you, I'm maybe 10 years old, I heard the story about that it was Ali who was received the revelation, and somehow Muhammad convinced him to take it away from him. So I don't know. It's all made up stories, man.
Exactly, but now you have actually just hit the nail in the head, because we have the story of Ali with these things about how it was meant to be him. We have the stories of Muhammad. We have the stories of Umar. We have as well in the Sirah that there is this guy, Salman al-Farisi, who is traveling from monastery to monastery. The whole story is long until he gets to the final guy, who is a priest. And he says that he's the only one who remembers the true religion. And he knows that Salman should go south and he will meet the last prophet and he will recognize him because the prophet has a mole, and also because Salman will give him food and he will not eat, and also because he will give him food and he will eat. And the whole thing is very silly. When you get as well to Tabari, you have a weird account of Al-Hajjaj. So this is much later, of Al-Hajjaj going into a monastery and asking a monk, are these things that are happening these days in your scriptures? And the monk says, yes, all of those things are in our scriptures. So basically there are a ton of stories about everybody either meeting the last hermit who knows everything about true religion, who confirms the guy as being prophesied. But then this is pretty much how people interpret this. All of these stories are fabrications, but the one about Bahira telling Muhammad is actually what happened. Muhammad told them that Bahira confirmed him. When you have all of these stories about everybody, how do you possibly know that the original story was not pointing at Umar, and then later they create the story about Muhammad or about Ali? These stories about giving themselves legitimacy, they appear about all of them. But we take the ones about Muhammad, we take them as gospel, and the rest, oh no, well, people made mistakes. Why? They literally made them that thing with the Shias in order to make Ali and Hussein the ones that you have to follow, they invented a ridiculous amount of stories. Maybe from a guy from history, they made him divine. It's like, but can you not see that that's exactly what they have done with Mohammed? He was a normal guy. He was a fighter, a warlord, a merchant. But they created the stories, and just like the Shias will worship Hussein and Ali because those people are divine, the Sunnis are doing the same with Muhammad. They were normal people. Where Jesus' resurrection was not invented, it is him doing it. In Islam, it was the other way around. You had normal people and they gave them superpowers. Muhammad did not, of the narrative, did not exist. They just packed a lot of stories to make that guy into divine, pretty much.
Yeah. If I can add something, there is this very strange, these very strange mentions in the Islamic narrative of false prophets. It's very, very strange. If you take the Islamic perspective, how could there be false prophets opposing Muhammad with other Islamic revelations? So they are named false prophets in the Islamic narrative. But it says that there was a sort of milieu, a context, where when there were many Arab leaders pretending to be prophets or to have a religious discourse, I think, about the end of times. There were different figures. In the Islamic narrative, we have 5 or 6 descriptions of these false prophets. One of them was a woman, by the way. And one of them pretended to be the equal of Muhammad. We are still within the Islamic narrative. And he wanted to divide the world in 2 halves, one half for Muhammad and one half for himself. So you see, it's not only about the main characters of the Islamic narrative, like Umar, Ali, Muhammad, and so on, but there were other people too. It's even bigger in a way that what you just presented, JC.
And it doesn't surprise me, because this is actually what they were doing. Like I explained before, with the Christians, they said, this is the history, the actual history of Jesus. And anything that was created later, like the Gnostic Gospels, they went through it and said, nope, not our guy. In Islam, it was the other way around. Everybody is trying to give themselves legitimacy, but in the end, someone has to do the canon, and it probably happens during the Abbasids. And we'll show a couple of other things, by the way. We're not done just yet.
JC, you're aiming to a very important fact. When things written about the Bible and about our Christian faith, which does not fit with the scripture, obviously early church fathers and the followers rejected it. You give a good example. They made Jesus perform these great miracles as an infant or a grown-up boy, whatever. We looked at the scripture, said that does not fit the scripture. The Bible did not say anything about it, the original gospels, therefore we rejected. Muhammad did not do that. Whoever wrote the Quran did not do that. He just liked stories. He'd like to add a few more pages with the beautiful poetry to make the miracle of Islam, the Quran. Therefore, he squeezed there in the Quran many. It's not just about Jesus. It is many stories all over the Old Testament, and even stories have nothing to do with the Bible. He inserted the Quran as if it is a revelation. So if I want to look at the Quran as a poetry book, if I don't know Arabic, yeah, it's beautiful. It sounds real good. If I know Arabic, yes, full of errors. I mean, grammatic errors. Foreign words in the Quran. The poetry are wrong. I mean, it's not right. But for those who does not know the Arabic language, they could not say anything wrong with it. But then, how about the message? There's no message in the book. Plenty of error, plenty of contradiction, plenty of nonsense. So, yes, Muhammad fall into the trap of whoever, I don't know, Muhammad or somebody else, to make the poetry of the Quran. And I see verses in the Quran cannot be explained. If we talk about Christ as the messenger, a Rasul, follows the messenger, that is good. But if you follow that messenger, you cannot follow other messenger. Why? Because Allah made those who follow Jesus the top forever. So there's no room for some other prophet. That's my point.
Yeah, and actually, as well, what you said, Usama, in the traditions and something this is well known. Even the Islamic scholars say this. Even Yasir Qadi, I've heard him say this: that if a hadith is longer with more details, it is a much later and is more likely to be a fabrication. It's like, well, he's almost right; they are all fabrications. But the longer they are, the more detail. They keep adding details. They keep expanding the story of Muhammad. So we see that even through their own sources. So we just need to take that all the way to the beginning. And it is, there is a guy, certainly, probably many of them, but the stories they are actually writing later. And when we mentioned before Umar, I still think that Umar is one of the main characters that is then taken into the story of Muhammad, because he obviously conquers Jerusalem, and songs of praise would be actually sung about him. He's the one that accomplishes something big. But the thing is, when we go through some sources, like the one here on the left, he's talking with a Christian. He has no problem with that Christian. It's a bit odd. You would think that in the narrative they would be a bit more, upset with Christians, but no, they were very friendly. Then we go the one on the right. We have from Tabari that Umar does very important things, like starts signing documents. He gathers, where is it here? He's the first one to assemble the people to one imam to lead them in a special Ramadan prayer. He also appoints two public Quran readers, which is surprising because they didn't have the Quran written down at that point. One to lead the man in prayer and one for the women. It's like these things should have been Muhammad. Why is Umar doing these big things? So he was a very important character, and I think they borrowed probably anything that was fitting into that and the final bit there. But then what it gets very interesting, and I really like this, is that in the correspondence between Leo III and Umar II, Leo III says it very clearly. That book that you are telling people that is divine was written by Umar, Ali, and Salman. And when I see the book written in this manner, it sounds like that's what they were taking. And by the way, they didn't even call it Quran at that point. That comes later, but that's a different conversation. So, and important things that in the traditions are attached to Umar, like the hijab. Women wear hijabs because of Umar, and then something is revealed after. And praying in one direction, in the direction of Mecca, is attached to Umar. These are very big things. Yet in their traditions, Umar is the one who says that, and then God reveals to Muhammad. It's a little bit suspicious.
Yeah.
So why would the original guy be Muhammad and not Umar? Maybe they were the one and only. Maybe they were
Yeah.
different ones.
But
But when they are creating the narrative, everything is just mixed up big
yeah,
time.
but you need to ask JC to also, if you study Asbab and Nuzul, why Allah reveals specific verses in the Quran, you found that the Quran come bits and pieces. We figure out literally a good 3/4 of a verse a day in that 23 years to come up with this 6,200 verses, whatever it was. And anyway, the one we have right now, there may be more was lost, but a verse a day, and Muhammad have many times he meet with some guy, he meet with a lady, and she asked him, and he asked him, and he wait on Jibril, and Jibril give him the answer. So the Quran is given to Muhammad bits and pieces as the needs comes. As that is what we learn from Asbab and Nuzul. I mean, some of it are very garbage. I mean, I cannot believe that Allah actually is given that. I mean, I have to argue with some Muslims years ago about your women is stealth to you, so enter your thoughts however you want. That talk about Asbab and Nuzul. A man had sex with his wife in the wrong way, the unusual way, and everybody found about it. So people talk to Muhammad. So Jibril told him, how you can have sex with your women in a way, shape, or form you want. Wrong, unusual, or unusual. Asbab and Nuzul. What does that verse have to do with anything with Allah's word, except it is to respond to specific need, to specific situation. Plenty of the Quran is given that way. I mean, think about it. If you got 23 years to write a book, you can write a book easy, 1,000 pages.
Yeah, but even with the Quran, for example, the verse I mentioned before about Allah forgiving Muhammad's sins, previous and past sins, you look at that and have to think, who cares? Why would Muhammad be saying that his sins are forgiven? Surely it should be something like the Sermon Mount, him saying to his people what Allah is going to do for them. But he's there going, oh, Allah is forgiving my sins. It's ridiculous. We know that there is more to that story. So this is how I think they invented the narrative. They went from the guy from history, and they created a whole different narrative through storytelling. So when we look at the Quran, when they put it together, it was saying something like this. This is just a theme. So the prophets from the children of Israel, they were promised a messenger who would confirm their scriptures. So they were promised the Messiah. They're still waiting for the Messiah. Then the Quran would say the children of Israel, they were told that they would believe in him because he confirms their scriptures and, whatever he says. Then that Jesus came confirming what they had. The Quran clearly says he confirms the Torah, at the very least by name, and that the children of Israel did not believe in him. So that would be the theme of the Quran. Then this thing happens. They shift the order pretty much in our heads. So Jesus came confirming what the Jews had, because the Quran says that. And the children of Israel did not believe in Jesus. And here is where the switcheroo happens. They move the verses that was telling to the Jews that the messenger, being the Messiah who confirms the scriptures, would be. Now they have swapped the order, and that is now in the present Muhammad saying that he is prophesied in the scriptures of the Jews, which creates the whole Islamic dilemma and all of these problems, because those verses are not saying that Muhammad is confirming their scriptures. It was saying that Jesus is confirming the scriptures. The theme was always the same theme. But because they do that, they have to create all of the stories of Muhammad speaking with the Jews and telling them, believe in me, I'm in your scriptures. But it was never about him to begin with.
Can you guys hear me at all?
Yeah.
Yes, we
hear my camera died and my mic died there for a second as well. I don't know, some driver bug. Look, there seems to be one that the Quran seems to be about Jesus, even if it's potentially heterodox, right? But then also, it also seems to be very anti-Jesus, very anti-Christ as well, right?
Anti-Christian.
Anti-Christian, yeah. But then you also have like the Sermon on the Mount, which you just mentioned, but Muslims go wild for the supposed, what's that sermon that Muhammad gave that's apparently so amazing? It was actually written in the, 1900s, 1980s, that Muhammad apparently gave a fantastic sermon, some beautiful sermon that was only recently found to have been written maybe 30 or 40 years ago by some guy in a book. But Muhammad gave a Sermon on the Mount type speech. So Muslims have been trying to, on the one hand, get rid of any mentions of potentially that the Quran was originally a Christian book. B, try to insert a counter narrative, and then C, also try to copy and one up the Christian narrative. So again, it's just there's a conflict, but there's also some sort of a jealousy, and there's an attempt to imitate. So there seems to be some confusion in the book as well between two different parties. Like it was one thing, then it became another, and then they're trying to make it what the other thing was, but not exactly the same, but in their image. So there's a bit of schizophrenia going on there as well.
Yeah, they were trying to do a better story because they had to have the best prophet and the last prophet. But I think the way that they were stuck with a number of things. For example, when it says that something is sent down, confirming what they had, it talks about sending the word of God, confirming the previous scriptures. But they were then stuck. They have to make it into the Quran, as Lloyd said earlier. So I think the switcheroo happens like this. Once they start finding verses that are not very clearly about Jesus, unless you actually read it through this lens and unpack them, then now Muhammad is saying to Jews that he's in the previous scriptures, but the Muhammad of history never said that. He probably learned a lot even from the Jews directly. That those claims, they only appeared because they took verses from the Quran and they said, this is no longer Jesus, it's Muhammad. And then Jesus, confirming what they have, now is Muhammad confirming what they have, except that he doesn't. But in the original, say, version, in the original interpretation, it's about Jesus. Nobody would have a problem. And then in the end, because they rejected Jesus, some of those verses are attached to Muhammad. So now the Jews have rejected Muhammad. It's like, but they were buddies. They actually went together to conquer Jerusalem. But because of that, they have to start inventing the story. And we have evidence of this right here, because this is what they have been doing for 1400 years, more like 1000. Everybody has either read the Hadith or heard from Zakir Naik, this, that Muhammad is prophesied in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew scriptures, because there is this thing that the God says to Moses, I will raise a prophet like you from among your brethren. And then Zakir Naik, this comes from the tafsirs, of course. He said, well, you see, because Moses is speaking to the Jews. So when he's saying from your brethren, the brethren of the Jews, they have to be the Ishmaelites. So this is our guy. And Christian apologists, who are very good at this, they show that every time that word appears in the Old Testament, it means the Israelites. It means you guys. So he's saying from your brethren, from your tribe, from you guys, there will be the prophet. This is a prophecy about Jesus. So what did they do? They point at it, and because they can put Mohammed into it, is theirs. This is the same thing they have done with the Quran. Anything that they could twist to shoehorn their new guy, that's what they did. They are doing it with Deuteronomy 18. If this passage said, the Lord will raise a prophet from your brethren who will be born from a virgin, he will not be able to take that verse. But because he can twist the words, they take it. It's been like this for over 1,000 years. This is the same tactic. This is what they have done even with their own book, replacing Jesus, putting Muhammad in.
Yeah, and as you said, Jesse, the scripture is very clear. When you point a king over you, he be from among your brethren. I never saw an Arab king over the Jewish people or any foreign king over the Jewish people. They always appoint their own kings from among their brethren. It's end of the argument.
There was the Persian emperor, for example, or Caesar. They ruled over the Jews.
Yeah. But by the way, I have a quick critique to the picture of Muhammad. Next time you need to shave his mustache, man. That is not the sunnah of Muhammad. No mustache, please. Please.
That's the one that is allowed because it's done by Muslims. So we're allowed to show it without getting too many fatwas.
It's a Shia image. It's a Shia image, Usama.
Oh, that's a Shia.
Yeah. And for some it's Muhammad, and for some others it's Ali.
Yeah. But if you want to do it right, move the mustache and put more black around the eye, please. Extra black.
Maybe, but I think that's haram. But maybe I will. So
haram?
What happens?
Prophet Muhammad said to do it, man.
So what happens with the Quran is pretty much like a lot of it. As I said, there will be parts of the history of the real guy, probably the Umar types, the Ali types, and other guys. But much of the fluff was actually taken like about Jesus. So you end up with this problem that Jesus is described as a messenger. Muhammad is also described as a messenger, except that it isn't Muhammad at all. We have Jesus described as a servant. When the verses are not clear, then Muhammad is now a servant. Jesus is the word of God and he's sent down and so on. Those things get twisted in the Quran to be, okay, this is now talking about the Quran, which is now the word of God. Yeah, sure, because Alexander the Great. We have Jesus confirming the previous scriptures. So when it says the messenger confirming the previous scriptures, well, now that's Muhammad and you create a whole problem, but it wasn't him to begin with. Jesus makes things lawful directly in Surah 350. So when we get to Surah 757, now the messenger is making things lawful. And it's like, yeah, it's the same guy. Because it says messenger, now is no longer Jesus. Jesus is described as a sign for the world, including with Mary, which is odd. Then we get that the guy who gives a book that you shouldn't even translate, you need to learn Arabic for it, that is the guy that is sent as the final messenger to the whole world, which makes no sense. We have that the canon or the arc of the Jews not believing in him, despite of the Quran saying in the Hebrew scriptures, he was prophesied, he will confirm them. That's why you need to believe in him. Oh, okay, we're back. It's just the usual glitch, so it's all good. Yes, so in the Quran, the Jews didn't believe in Jesus, but then because they start exegeting verses as being they don't believe in Mohammed, you have to create the stories that tell that, because you're replacing one arc with the other, and that he must be believed and he must be followed. When in the Quran it was exclusively about Jesus, but because now they have the messenger, they replace him in that manner. Because of that, they have to create the whole sunnah over hundreds of years, stories to justify that Muhammad, the one that they send prayers to, is in the Quran, when this is the switcheroo. So anyway, that's the end of it. What do you think?
Yeah. Well done. Well done.
Beautiful, beautiful job. I love that.
Very
I
good.
love this. That page
Yeah.
is worth the time to spend here today. Yes, indeed.
Mhm.
Very good conclusion here.
Thank
JC,
you.
you
It's the
could add
first time. It's
something.
the first time I got it's the first time I got an ovation. So thank you very much, gentlemen. Much appreciated.
Oh, it's deserved. But
Yes,
JC,
very
you
good.
had something on your last slide. I was very, I was fascinated by the big slide you did with all the mentions to Jesus in the Quran, and there were a lot of them that were about the followers of Jesus. They are the one who will be successful, and they are the one who will win in the end. You could add this here also.
Yes.
And it's it makes me think to a remark I should have done earlier. It's the coherence of all you presented. Remember the external sources that we saw, Sebeos and mostly Doctrina Jacobi. From then, we were able to infer that the early Islam, the early movement, was about worshipping Jesus as the Messiah and having him descend in a sort of apocalypse. And the one who followed Jesus at the time, during this time, they were the one who would have been who would have won it all. They would have been the successful one. God would have placed them upon all other men. They would have ruled the world, sort of. You see here the coherence between the Doctrina Jacobi telling that Muhammad, or the historical Muhammad, announced the imminent coming, and what we see in the Quran. We see in the Quran a description of Jesus that that are supposed to attract Arab followers, because they will be attracted to, they will have benefits. They will rule over the world. They will be the successful ones. It also tells us something about the making of the Quran. The Quran was not made as a book. It's a collection of many different texts. These texts are about preaching Jesus, for example, preaching the end of times and so on. And we know that the Arabs, with the help of Jews, they conquered Jerusalem around 638. They rebuilt the temple there, but the Messiah didn't come. But they kept on waiting for him. And you see, from the taking of Jerusalem up to the last edition of the Quran by Abdul Malik, there was a period of around 50 years, maybe 60, during which they kept on their text about Jesus. They kept on their text about the followers of Jesus being the successful one. They kept on waiting for the Messiah to come. And that's very interesting. It gives a new light to this very dark period of times. These 40, 60 years, it's very muddy, it's very shady. We don't really know what happened. There were wars, fitna wars. There were assassinations of caliphs and the sons of Ali, for example. But thanks to this, we see that there was this thing about Jesus still going on. Of course, it's not the Christian Jesus. It's Jesus as a political Messiah coming back to earth in order to establish God's kingdom on earth and to elevate his followers above the others. Anyway, it's been very, very, very interesting, JC.
Thanks. I think
Thank you.
that, well, I don't deal much with the actual history, but at least I try to help remove the things from the book that might actually lead us to other in other directions. But for example, the work from Paul with all being centered about Jerusalem is like, yes, and we see that in the sources, is the prize city. So we know there is a lot of stuff going on there. And then 250 years later is when we're already having this thing called Islam with a level of traditions, and it's just in its infancy. So how to go from A to B is putting all of these pieces together. But if we can see that more of these stories that we've been told about Muhammad, the same stories that were there with Ali and with Salman and with everybody else, is like, okay, let's not actually take those as history because the same story is written about everybody else. Let's actually look at the sources, look at the Quran, and try to just find the way of making the pieces joined. So yeah, but Muhammad of Islam didn't exist. In reality, yes, there were one, probably even more than one Muhammad, but the one that they worship is as real as Gandalf the Grey.
No, well done, JC. I thought that was an absolutely excellent presentation. I always like it when somebody builds up a lot of or takes out a lot of elements and then brings it all together in one conclusion. I thought you did that absolutely excellent. Yeah, to me, the Umayyads, they didn't have the whole text of the Quran. Maybe it hadn't been written then, or maybe it had, but they were not working from that text. But the Umayyads clearly had some influence from the Quran and from the religious movement that was going on around it. And for them, there was absolutely no doubt that it was all about Jerusalem, because you see it in the Dome of the Rock and the Dome of the Chain, and the Eastern Gate that's pointing up to the Dome of the Ascension, so the Chapel of the Ascension. So the expectation was that whole complex is that Jesus would return to earth up at the Chapel of the Ascension on the Mount of Olives. He'd make his way across the Kidron Valley, moving from Safa to Marwa, and he'd enter through the Eastern Gate, the Golden Gate, go up the stairs. He'd be enthroned over the foundation stone of the temple, which is what the Dome of the Rock really is. There is a throne room. With all the inscriptions around the inside tell us all about Jesus, and then he would come out and judge the world under the Dome of the Chain. And it seems to me absolutely clear that the Umayyads were generally in keeping with the Quran, and they interpreted it all as a Christian message. And really, the whole thing falls apart with the Abbasids when there was 750. And they just want to move the whole focus away from Jerusalem. They want it all to be about Mesopotamia and Persia, and they reject any attempts to interpret the Quran as the Quran wants to be interpreted, by reference to Jesus and the Bible and the prophet, the old Jewish prophets, and they completely belittle that and superimpose this fantasy version of Muhammad that has absolutely no basis in reality at all. But I just to go back to your slide, I thought it was absolutely excellent, this idea that Jesus is there in an old sense, but is also the verses that were relating to Jesus are then recycled and turned into verses about Muhammad. Yeah,
And
I'm sure that's absolutely what happened.
yeah, and last word for me, if you don't mind. I believe you can make out of the Quran, if we have the original Quran without the alif and hamza, without the vowels, without the dots, you can make anything out of it. I mean, literally, any person who get a page of the Quran and say, "Let me make it go A or Z," you can, no problem whatsoever. So maybe that's why we have this so many invention in the Quran by Muslims about their Islam and their Quran.
Paul, I was thinking about one thing. You said the Umayyads were all about Jesus, sort of, but they were waiting for him to come back. But I've got this in mind. I think the Umayyads invented the hadith about Jesus coming back in Damascus. He's supposed to descend on the minaret of the great mosque of the Umayyads in Damascus. So you see, at a point during the Umayyad period, something shifted, something changed. Because at first they were waiting for Jesus to come back to Jerusalem, and there come a time where they invented this hadith about him coming back in Damascus. And the question is, when did this change? Is it around Abdul Malik, or is it his successors, his Umayyad successors? So you see, there was already a process of invention and fabrication of the religion during the Umayyads' time that led ultimately to the Abbasids and the fabrication of Muhammad.
Yeah.
Yes, I totally agree that the stories about Muhammad were starting to form in Umayyad times. I must admit, I'm not familiar with the Damascus hadith. I've never heard that before.
There are a lot of there are several other hadiths about Jesus' Jesus' second coming happening in Damascus, and then he will walk all the way to Jerusalem. He will kill the Dajjal, the Antichrist, on his way, and there are strange details about him having water in his hair. It's very, very, very strange. But ultimately, he is to come to Jerusalem, starting from Damascus, and it's the actual scenario for the end times in Islam, in Sunni Islam.
Am I right in thinking that the Eastern Gate, which is now often called the Golden Gate or the Mercy Gate, into the Temple Mount, that's bricked up,
the Messiah Gate?
Wasn't that originally called the Sushan Gate? And the Sushan Gate was a reference to Damascus. Is that not right?
I don't know, but I think it's nowadays it's also called the Messiah Gate.
I got a feeling that in the original, before Islam, before all of this happened, the Jews used to refer to it as the Sushan Gate, and that is a reference to Damascus. I'm not quite. It's Sushan, an area in Damascus or something. It was just the direction. It was that direction. But it's interesting that the gate was always important, because from Ezekiel's time onwards, there was always expected that was the gate the Messiah was going to go through.
Sorry to interrupt. I'm just going to say thank you to BMW 635 for that's 10 New Zealand dollars. Just great analysis, JC, and God bless you all. Donna, New Zealand, thank you very much. And then Paul LR also says it does make sense. And also the Dome of the Rock doesn't face Mecca, so none of that was properly established, which is another valid point. And the Dome of the Rock also is modeled on the Church of the Kathisma, which is a 4th century construction, which also at some point became what would you call it? It became at one point it was a place where Jews, Muslims, and Christians worshipped. So there was that kind of attempt to unify before they split off and went off in their own directions. So there was a movement that tried to unify these under a single banner, but that failed. And then the Muslims obviously adopted their own identity. But even within them, there were schisms, and they had to reconcile those.
But the very existence of the Dome of the Rock is proof that Mecca did not exist at the time. Should Abdul Malik have ruled over an Islamic Mecca, he would have built the Dome of the Rock in Mecca, or he would have built something at least as magnificent as the Dome of the Rock in Mecca. But he didn't do anything in Mecca. He didn't build any palace or big mosque or no. So it's evidence that Mecca did not.
Or in Yathrib, or any of the other places that are supposedly important. There are no, as far as I know, there's no monument that was ever built to mark the locations of the Battle of Uhud, or
for example,
and even the trench seems to have mysteriously disappeared. So there's no one's built anything anywhere.
Yeah, but there's no archaeology
remotely comparable.
Yeah, I mean, my camera's working again, thank heavens, but there's no archaeology. There's nothing preserved. I mean, where's their copy of the Injil? Where's their copy of the original Bible that Mohammed had and had access to at the time to prove their claims? Where is, I mean, how did those two fat footprints get into the stone that's next to the Kaaba that Abraham supposedly stood on the stone, and he makes these massive, very neat little, they're not even footprints, they're just impressions.
Lloyd, listen, brother. Allah made it that way. I repeat myself again, just for people like you and others to disbelieve. You want evidence? There is no evidence.
So Abraham had these little like feet that look like a pill. I mean, seriously, it looks like a capsule. It looks like a pill. I mean, honestly, it looks. This is turmeric here. Hang on. I mean, I'm supposed to believe that Abraham had feet that looked like this.
Yes.
Well, maybe he was wearing, specifically. Maybe he was wearing big shoes.
Yes.
I mean, seriously, where's the archaeology to prove that, as they claim, that right next to the Kaaba, within 2 meters of the Kaaba, is the body of Ishmael and his mother? Listen, brother. Where's the 30-meter tall Adam? Where are the up to 300 prophets that are buried next to the Kaaba?
I'm trying to help you. First, took the Shahada. After he takes the Shahada, the Lord Allah will clarify everything to you, and you will have no doubt whatsoever. But you have to take the Shahada first.
No, but if they want to claim that this is a religion founded in history, then we're going to need some historical details. And all of the archaeology somehow disappears, but all of the inscriptions often just go in the wrong direction.
Yeah, look, I think it's quite simple that Islam is not a complete and utter fabrication made up of stories and stories. It's only that Allah made it appear like it was a complete fabrication.
Yeah, exactly. That's why it was made.
It's not an optical illusion. It just looks like one.
Yes. MashaAllah.
Allah is the greatest of deceivers.
Yes.
So never forget this.
He is the best deceiver. هم مكروا والله خير الماكرين. The best deceiver, man.
I mean, look, the standard narrative is a trap, because once you're sucked in, as you say, once you check in your brain at the door,
MashaAllah,
which you do with your shoes as well.
Yes.
You are then trapped inside of a narrative that is self-supporting.
Submission.
You assume that this story makes sense and you go along with it. But that's
we call that in Islam, Brother Lloyd, we call that in Islam total submission. Take your shoes, take your brain outside the door.
I'm not a turtle, therefore I cannot give turtle submission.
I can't help you, brother. I can't help you. I'm sorry. I'm trying to help you, but you're not listening. You sound like an infidel, aren't you?
You know,
I love you guys. I have to go. God bless you.
Yeah, guys, it's been a couple of hours, and you know the Quran says that thou shalt not overstay thy welcome in the house of the prophet.
Yeah, when you eat, hit the road, Jack. Don't come back no more. That's the story of the song. It came out of this. And don't talk softly to the prophet's wives, because he's kind of shy. He's kind of embarrassed to tell you, don't have soft talk with my women. You eat and you just here's the road. Okay.
Yeah. Now this story is falling apart, and I mean, the more we examine it, the more we're going to find insights. So yeah, should we call it tonight here and then come back to this again if JC has more stuff? But I mean, this is starting to, it's being tackled from different, tackled from different angles, and we're starting to see this thing fall apart.
Yeah,
I love it, but I wish we can read the verses and, you know, mesmerize, like meditate on it or enjoy to learn more about the verse.
So we'll come back. We'll do it again. I mean, everyone has a role to play. Yeah, I was, some of it I didn't understand, was over my head. It's not something I'm familiar with. Others, yes. And then I also had issues with my computer, as you noticed. But yeah, this was fascinating, really fascinating.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
So let's come back and do this again. I mean, this is great. You know, maybe next week we can have this talk again. And I think it's also just great throwing out ideas, and we should invite other people and, you know, get their ideas as well. Hopefully Dan Gibson will one day actually just come and show up. It'll be great.
Yeah, come on. Lloyd, we will have Robert Kerr with us soon.
Super duper. Great.
Super.
That sounds great.
Forward to that.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
God
Paul?
bless you all. God bless you all.
All
Thanks,
right.
JC. Good job, man.
Thank you very much, JC. Excellent.
God
Thank you.
bless
Take
you.
care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. God bless. Good night.
Night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good night.